What would you do if the world tried to destroy your child's future? For years, I stayed silent, swallowing my pain. But when I saw the truth with my own eyes, I knew silence was no longer an option. My revenge would burn brighter than their cruelty. My name is David Miller. I'm 45 years old. And for most of my life, I believed that silence was the best way to protect my family. I was never the loud, aggressive type. I worked quietly, earned a modest living as a carpenter, and tried to give my daughter, Emily, the childhood she deserved. Emily was my pride, my light in the darkness after her mother passed away when she was just 7 years old. From that day, I became both her father and her mother. Every meal I cooked, every bedtime story I read, every school meeting I attended, I did it with one thought in my mind: she will never feel alone. But life has a cruel way of testing fathers. At first, I noticed small things. Emily would come home from school with a forced smile. When I asked her, she always said, "I'm fine, Dad." I wanted to believe her. Maybe I was too blind or maybe too afraid, but I didn't press her. I thought silence, patience, and trust would keep her safe. Until the day I saw the truth for myself. I went to pick her up early from school. She didn't know I was coming. As I walked past the courtyard, I froze. There she was, my Emily, surrounded by 3 older boys, their laughter cruel and sharp like knives. They shoved her books into the mud, called her names I can't repeat, and one of them pushed her so hard she almost fell. My blood boiled. Every instinct in me screamed to rush forward and break them apart, but I didn't. I stood there, gripping the wooden railing until my knuckles turned white. Why? Because the teachers were watching and they did nothing. Because I wanted to see who they truly were, and I wanted to remember every face. That night, Emily cried in her room, muffling her sobs with a pillow. I sat outside her door, my fists clenched, my chest aching with rage. I had failed her once by being silent, but I swore to myself, never again. And yet, I still didn't act, not right away. I waited. I planned, because this time, my silence would not be weakness. It would be the calm before the storm. The night after I witnessed Emily being humiliated, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every muscle in my body tense, my jaw aching from how tightly I clenched my teeth. Silence had always been my shield, but now it felt like a prison. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, pale, tear-streaked, and fragile. She was only 15, too young to bear the cruelty of the world, and yet forced to. And what had I done? Nothing. I had watched. I had waited. My chest burned with shame. The next morning, I walked her to school. She forced another smile, whispered, "I'll be okay, Dad," and hurried inside. But I could see it. The way her shoulders slumped, the hesitation in her steps, the nervous glance over her shoulder. I promised myself I would no longer pretend. I started small. I learned their names. The boys who bullied her were sons of powerful men in town. The ringleader, Jason, was the son of the mayor himself. The other 2, Ryan and Cole, came from families who had influence in the school board and local business. That explained why the teachers turned a blind eye. They weren't just ignoring Emily. They were protecting the powerful. That knowledge made my blood run cold. How could my daughter ever fight back when the whole system was against her? But I wasn't afraid of power. Not anymore. For years, I've been a carpenter, building homes and furniture for the same people who now allowed my daughter to suffer. I had fixed the mayor's fence, built shelves for Ryan's father's office, and repaired Cole's family porch. I knew these people, their weaknesses, their secrets. My silence had made me invisible, but invisibility was a weapon. That evening, I began writing in an old leather notebook. I wrote down every detail I remembered, their names, their families, their habits, who they talked to, where they hung out, what time they left school. I followed them quietly, blending into the background like a shadow. No one suspected a quiet carpenter of being dangerous, but danger was exactly what I was becoming. One night, while Emily slept, I found myself sitting in my workshop. The smell of sawdust clung to the air, familiar and comforting. On the bench in front of me lay my tools, hammers, chisels, saws. They had built homes and mended lives. But as I stared at them, another thought crept into my mind. These tools could also destroy. I shook my head, forcing the thought away. I didn't want blood. Not yet. Revenge wasn't about rage. It was about justice. I wanted them to feel what Emily felt. Powerless, small, broken. So I started with Jason. I knew his father, the mayor, was hosting a campaign dinner the following week. Jason, arrogant as always, bragged about it to his friends while standing outside school. He didn't notice me nearby, cleaning my truck. He never noticed me. That night, I drove past the mayor's house. I remembered every nail I had hammered into that porch, every crack I had fixed. I also remembered the locked side gate that Jason often forgot to secure. Opportunity was presenting itself. I spent days preparing, my notebook filled with sketches and plans. I crafted small wooden boxes, engraved with mocking words, ready to deliver. Each one would carry a message. I see you, I know you, and I'm coming. But even as I planned, guilt gnawed at me. Was I becoming the very monster I wanted to protect Emily from? Could revenge twist me into something unrecognizable? One night, I sat by her bed, watching her sleep. Her chest rose and fell softly, her face finally peaceful. I whispered, "I'll make them pay, sweetheart. You won't cry because of them again. I promise you." For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange calm, not the silence of fear, but the silence of certainty. And so began the whispers of vengeance, because I was done being invisible. I told myself the plan would be precise, nonviolent, surgical. No blood, no broken bones, only exposure. I wanted their reputations to splinter the way they had splintered Emily's confidence. I wanted them to feel small, to have doors close in their faces, to taste the cold silence they'd forced upon my daughter. That was my line. I would not cross into what would make me a criminal. I promised that to myself as carefully as I promised Emily the night before. The mayor's fundraiser was a perfect stage, a room full of the town's elite, cameras likely nearby, and Jason's ego primed to perform. He would arrive in expensive clothes and leave with the same boyish arrogance, unaware that even the most polished veneer cracks when the right pressure is applied. On the day of the event, I woke before dawn. I prayed in a way I hadn't before, not to ask for help, but to steel my resolve. Then I went to my workshop. My hands moved automatically, as if guided by muscle memory. I carved the last of the wooden boxes with steady rhythm, each stroke releasing a fraction of the tension lodged inside me. Inside each box, I placed a small folded note. Nothing that could be traced legally as slander, only facts I had patiently gathered. The notes contained names, dates, witnesses, a trail of verifiable small injustices, payments made to secure privileges, petty betrayals that, when strung together, painted a picture of corruption and cowardice. Most importantly, each box had a photograph, a snapshot of Jason and his friends in the acts they thought were private. Sneering, shoving Emily, laughing as she crumpled. I dressed in clothes that would make me invisible. Old jeans, a work shirt, a cap pulled low. I parked a block away and walked to the venue like just another face in the crowd. The room smelled of perfume and candle wax, of cheap wine and confident laughter. I could see the mayor at the head table, shaking hands, affable and polished. Jason was across the room, louder than necessary, accepting compliments with a grin that made my teeth ache. I moved through the crowd with my boxes tucked into a canvas bag. My plan was simple. Leave a box on the chairs of those who had influence over the school. The principal, 2 trustees, a wealthy parent who had once advised the mayor on hiring. I wanted the seed of doubt to be planted directly into the people who had the power to demand answers. If the system was rotten, it deserved to be pried open by those within it. One by one, I placed the boxes. No one noticed. A waiter brushed past me. I smiled and let him pass. The mayor raised his glass. The crowd clinked silverware. Then Jason stood, his voice loud and arrogant, commanding the room with one of his mocking anecdotes. The laughter rang out. That was my cue. A mother reached for her purse and opened the box. Her eyes widened at the photograph inside. She whispered to her husband, who frowned and then looked at Jason. Another trustee unfolded his note, his face blanching. Within minutes, The ripple became a wave. Murmurs filled the room. Eyes darted to the stage. Phones came out snapping pictures of the damning evidence. Jason's bravado faltered. He stammered, tried to laugh it off, but the crowd was no longer with him. His father, the mayor, clenched his jaw, his practiced smile cracking. For the first time, Jason's eyes found me in the corner. He froze. He recognized me. The quiet man he had dismissed was no longer invisible. I left before security could catch up, melting into the night. Hours later, the scandal exploded across town. By morning, Jason was suspended pending investigation. The trustees demanded answers, and the principal scrambled to explain years of negligence. It wasn't full justice. Not yet, but it was a first strike. And in Emily's smile that morning, faint but real, I saw hope bloom again. When you push against power, it always pushes back. For a brief moment, I believed the storm was calming. Jason had been suspended, the town whispering corners, and Emily was finally walking through the school gates with her chin just a little higher. But revenge is never a single act. It creates ripples, and ripples always come back to you. It started with the phone calls, anonymous numbers, men breathing into the receiver before hanging up. Then came the vandalism. My truck, the same one I had used for 20 years, was keyed so deeply along the side that the paint curled like peeled skin. My tools, the ones I needed to survive, were stolen from the back of my shed. Emily noticed too. Whispers in hallways turned into laughter behind her back. Someone slipped a note into her locker that read, "Your daddy fights your battles because you're too weak." She tore up before I could see, but I found the pieces in her backpack later. My heart broke all over again. I realized that by exposing Jason and his friends, I had done more than shine a light on them. I had humiliated families that were used to untouchable pride, and humiliation breeds cruelty. One evening, as I locked up the workshop, headlights flooded the driveway. A black SUV idled there, the kind with tinted windows and wheels too polished for our dusty town. The window rolled down and a voice, smooth, deliberate, called out, "Mr. Miller, it would be wise to stop digging graves you can't fill." Then the car pulled away, leaving behind nothing but exhaust fumes and silence. I stood frozen, gripping the hammer still in my hand. It wasn't just Jason anymore. His father, the mayor, had entered the game, and men like him didn't play fair. I wrestled with myself that night. Should I stop? Should I swallow my pride, pull Emily close, and disappear into anonymity? But as I watched her sleeping, her face peaceful for the first time in weeks, I knew retreat wasn't an option. I had already stepped into the fire, and the only way out was through. So I escalated. I gathered every stolen record I could find. With the help of the lawyer, I pulled public documents, old police reports, campaign donation receipts that didn't add up. I started piecing together a trail, not just of Jason's cruelty, but his father's corruption. If they wanted to threaten me, they needed to remember, a carpenter may work with wood, but he also knows how to carve people down to size. And so, while they plotted in shadows, I sharpened my tools of truth, because retaliation had arrived. But the reckoning was still mine to deliver. They thought they could scare me into silence. They thought the scratches on my truck, the stolen tools, the whispered threats would bend me until I folded. They were wrong. The lawyer, and I moved with care. We filed formal complaints, served subpoenas, and pressured the school board into holding a hearing. Evidence isn't loud the way a fist is. It is methodical and steady. It chips away at foundations until the whole thing trembles. We called witnesses who'd been too afraid to speak before. We brought forward receipts, phone record, and photographs. The same photographs I had tucked into those wooden boxes, now cataloged and sworn to paper. One by one, the town's veneer cracked. Jason's suspension turned into a formal investigation. The principal who had looked the other way was reprimanded, then suspended, and later asked to resign when old complaints he had ignored resurfaced under scrutiny. The trustee who'd benefited from favors found himself under audit. The mayor, once untouchable, faced questions that couldn't be outrun by speechwriters and fundraising dinners. There were angry phone calls, threats, and even a smear campaign aimed at discrediting Emily. It was ugly, But the law isn't swayed by power when enough facts line up. The boys tried to push back in the only way they knew, by turning peers against Emily. Rumors spread, and for a while it felt like we were standing in the middle of a storm that would not end. Then, quietly, a teacher came forward who had seen more than she had admitted. Another student corroborated Emily's accounts. Their courage came not from me, but from a slow, spreading sense of conscience in the town. When regular people start to choose truth over comfort, power loses. The hearing was long and exhausting. I sat beside my daughter, watching the room like a man who has learned to not trust appearances. I spoke when it was necessary, but mostly I listened. What mattered were the facts, the witnesses, and the stubborn persistence of an ordinary man who refused to be dismissed. When the verdicts came, they were not all vindicating. No law can repair every scar, but they were real. Jason was expelled, the principal left his post, and several officials faced fines or investigations. The school instituted real anti-bullying measures and anonymous reporting. People began to talk about accountability in a way they hadn't before. But justice in the public sense is messy, and revenge, if it becomes about destroying lives, is ugly. I had promised myself I would not become that. In the quiet that followed the hearing, I forced myself to remember that my fight was always for Emily's peace, not for the taste of others' ruin. I wanted the town to change, to protect the children who could not protect themselves, not to watch families fall apart for the spectacle of it. So I made a choice. I declined offers to gloat, to press the advantage further. I returned a piece of the power in the only way I could, by refusing to let hatred swallow me. I offered testimony to the reforms, joined a parent advisory council, and worked with the school to create a program that would train teachers to notice and act. The lawyer who had helped us asked for only a small fee. He said he believed in what we had done. Emily, for her part, began to heal in ways that were small and stubborn. She started art classes. She stayed longer with friends who had stood by her, and she let me braid her hair each morning again. There were scars. There were neighbors who never forgave me for exposing their comfortable silence. There were late nights when I replayed choices in my head and wondered if I had gone too far. But the house felt lighter. At night, when the radio played softly and the lights in the kitchen hummed, Emily and I would sit at the table and talk about everything and nothing. Once she said, "Dad, I didn't know someone could fight for you like that and still be gentle." I smiled and told her the truth. Strength isn't loud. It is patient and fierce. It protects without crushing. Years later, the town was not perfect, but was better in small, measurable ways. The new policies caught problems earlier. The kids who once hid their pain found outlets. Jason moved away with his family after the scandal wore at their pride. And while life had become difficult for him, it was not my job to watch him burn. He was a young man who would one day have to look at the consequences of what he'd done. As for me, I kept working with wood. I built a bench in the school courtyard, a small thing with brass plaque that read, "For those who stand when others sit quietly." Emily's name does not appear on it, because this was not a monument for revenge. It was a promise that the next child would not have to bear the same silence. On summer evenings, we would sit on that bench together. People would pass and sometimes nod. Some would avoid our eyes. But mostly they walked by and, little by little, the town's fabric began to reweave itself with threads of accountability. I am still David Miller. I am still a father who loves his daughter and fears for her at times. I am still imperfect. But the silence that once felt safe had been transformed into something else, into stories told, lessons taught, and a community forced to look at itself. I had chosen to be visible, and in that visibility, I found a quiet kind of victory. When I tuck Emily into bed now, I sometimes whisper a phrase I said years ago, "You won't cry because of them again." She smiles in her sleep, and I believe her, and I believe myself, a little more every day.